Opening the Dharma.
The Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. Now we can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we completely realize the Jataka's true meaning. This is the third day of our 2018 Jataka session here at the Vermont Zen Center. And tonight we'll resume looking at a Jataka in the human realm. In fact, because our human realm is in such dire straits, and because our human realm has such significant, long-lasting effects on all other visible realms, animal, bird, fish, insect, and plant, our four remaining Teishos for this Sesshin will explore past human births of the Bodhisatta. What we do has consequences everywhere else. So tonight we will look at the Temiya Kumaro Jataka, number 538. The name Temiya means the wet one. It was given to the Bodhisatta in this birth as he was born during a period of heavy rain that fell throughout the kingdom, a propitious sign. It is considered the most important Jataka in Myanmar and is renowned throughout Southeast Asian Buddhist countries. As the first of the so-called last 10 Jatakas, it is depicted on temple walls in Thailand, along with the 9 others of that important group, all of which, taken together, are held to present a summation of the Buddhist path. I'd like to read to you the introductory story of the present, very brief. And this is in Sarah Shaw's The Jataka's Birth Stories of the Bodhisatta. It's a terrific little book. It's a Penguin paperback. And she's done a very good job of selecting quite a good variety of Jatakas and translating them. Actually 26 Jatakas, and translating them today. The only other current, actually complete translation of the Jatakas into English, all 547 tales, was done in 1877 or so. It's the Cowell translation and still the only complete one. And a word to you about it, that complete Pali Jataka is now available online for free. So any of you can go and see the Cowell translations of each of the Jatakas. And in doing so, you'll see something of how I've worked with them and the way we explore them together. So the story of the present, and a word about this. Keep in mind that tradition tells us that the Buddha didn't sit around talking about his past lives. He wasn't that kind of teacher. Rather, Jatakas, that is his past life stories, were told only in response to some event in his Sangha. Something elicited each tale as an appropriate teaching. An image from this Jataka, the Temiya Jataka, appears at the Barut Stupa, dating perhaps to around 125 BCE. So we have evidence of its popularity from very early on. So this is the story of the present. While staying in the Jetavana Grove, the teacher told this story about the higher renunciation. One day the monks were sitting together in the Dhamma, we would say Dharma Hall, praising the nature of the great renunciation as practiced by the Blessed One. The teacher came and asked, "What subject have you been discussing while sitting together, bhikkhus?" When they had described it, he said, "No, bhikkhus, we would say victures, this renunciation of leaving my kingdom, which I practiced once I had fulfilled the perfections, that is the paramitas, was not marvelous. For when my knowledge was still unripe and I was attaining the perfections, I left the kingdom then and renounced the world. When he had said this at their request, he narrated this story of long ago. And so now we'll look at the Temiya Jataka and then comment on it. Long ago, the Buddha was born as a prince in the ancient city of Benares. 500 sons of other noble families were born that same day. The Brahmins declared the prince possesses every mark of excellence and good fortune. He will not only rule Benares, as well as the realm of Kasi and the entire continent of Jambudvipa, or Rose Apple Land, but all cities, kingdoms, and continents. He has the marks of a world ruler. Rejoice. When Prince Temiya was a month old, they adorned him with jewels and silken clothes and brought him to his father, the king. The king took his infant son on his lap. 4 robbers were brought in for sentencing. Whip this one with thorns, announced the king. Imprison this one in chains. Spear this one. And for the last, he decreed, impale him on a stake. The infant prince, hearing his father pass sentence on the robbers, awoke to his own past karma. Long ago, I was king in this city, and I ruled for 20 years. As king, I rightly condemned men for their crimes, but because of that, after death, I suffered for 80,000 years in the Yasada hell. Then I was born into the heaven of the 33 gods. There, Chakra, king of the gods, asked me to be born back into this world. My desire had been to advance to the realm of the higher gods. But Chakra said that the prayers of my parents to me were earnest, and by returning to this world, I would benefit many beings. So I agreed. Now here I am, destined to again be king. As king, I will have to do what my father is now doing, and will again land back in the hells I recently left. I must renounce the world and find freedom. So the infant thought. The next day, the Bodhisatta was lying in a bed out on the lawn beneath a white umbrella. The goddess who dwelt in the umbrella had been the Bodhisatta's mother in a previous life and knew his thoughts. She said, "Dear child, if you wish to escape the heavy karma of kingship, let no one know your real intelligence and skill. Pretend to be lame, deaf, dumb, and slow of mind. If you are thought useless, you will eventually be freed from the burden of ruling, but be prepared. You will be tried and tested to the limit if you really mean to be free. It is not a path for the faint-hearted." "Mother Goddess," answered the infant, "I am determined and will do as you say." Then, starting that day, the infant Bodhisattva did not turn over, laugh, or cry. He no longer smiled infant smiles, did not lift his head, seek the breast, reach with chubby arms, kick with little legs, or look at his golden ivory rattles. Instead, he lay silent as a block of wood or stone. He had been a normal, active infant. Now he lay still and had to be forced to nurse. His hands remained balled in fists. He seemed without sight or hearing, unresponsive in every way. His father, the king, walked the halls at night, muttering. His mother sat by the cradle, begging, pleading, praying, weeping, sobbing. How many hopes died there? Only a mother can say. The child saw their grief and thought, if I reveal the truth, I'll never escape. I remember the sufferings of the hells, and I'm not going back there. Despite the efforts of his parents and nurses, he would not give way. The king's advisors said, bring the 500 noble children born on the same day as the prince. Make sure they're hungry and thirsty. Let them nurse. He will see them and respond. The babies were brought. All 500 began crying and were nursed. But the prince, thinking of the flames of hell, lay still. At last, his mother and nurses gave in. They nursed him. The king's advisor said, wait until he cries before nursing him. But the child lay silent and unmoving through burning thirst and hunger. If I give in, he thought, I'm lost. Better suffer these pains now than rule for 20 or 40 years and fall again into 80,000 years of hell. Again, his mother and nurses, fearing that he would die, gave in. A year went by. The wise men said, this may not be the right motivator. What treats do children like? Cakes and sweets, said the nurses. The 500 children and the prince were brought to a banquet of cakes and sweets. The children toddled forward and grabbed everything, smearing their mouths, hands, and faces with pastries and puddings. The prince thought, beware, Temiya. If your love of sweets is revealed, you will pay the price. Eat if it's hell's flames you love. He lay still. They tried this for a year, but could not break him. They tried sweet fruits next. The children grabbed at mangoes, figs, bananas, berries. The prince did not move. Another year passed. The advisors scratched their heads. Toys, they exclaimed. What child does not love toys? Splendid toys were brought. Wheeled elephants, jeweled horses, painted tigers with ivory teeth, cloth monkeys and deer, wind-up toys that threw arrows and stones, danced and spoke. Such toys! The other children went mad for them and wept in rage when the toys were pried from their hands at day's end. The prince lay still. Your love for toys will carry you to hell, he told himself. Grab them if it's 80,000 years of fire you also wish to claim. Another year went by, and the king's wise men admitted defeat. They tugged their beards and said, maybe pets? The 500 children loved the baby animals. The prince lay unmoving. The Brahmins and doctors sighed and said, he is not motivated by happiness. Maybe fear will get a response. His mother, the queen, sat beside Temiya, telling him of coming dangers, begging him to speak, to respond, to merely even shift his eyes her way. Temiya thought, if I reveal myself, I will save my mother from distress, but doom myself. He lay still. A house of palm leaves with many doors was built, and the strange little prince and his 500 companions put inside. The house was set on fire. The 500 children ran out screaming. The prince lay still. The flames roared. His servant rushed in, and while others doused the flames, grabbed the child, carrying him to safety. Then they went for broke. A rampaging elephant produced no signs of fear. Defanged cobras terrified the other children, but the Bodhisatta, remembering the terrors of the hells, lay still and let the snakes glide over him. A wild-eyed madman swinging a bloody sword had no effect. The child sat still, remembering the swords that had sliced his flesh in hell. The madman, in reality an actor, was led away. At 9 and 10 years of age, they tried conches blown by 50 men at his bedside in the middle of the night. Nothing. They tried bright lights in the middle of the night. No response. At 12 years, they experimented with molasses and bugs. Flies and ants covered him and bit. He did not flinch, cry out, or stir. Then they let him lie in his own filth. Sores broke out. He stank. Hell is worse, recalled the child. He did not move. His mother could not bear it. She had him bathed and cleaned. Heat, said the king's advisors. Bedpans were filled with coals and placed beneath his bed. Sweat poured from the prince's body. Boils appeared. His back became a blister. He thought of the flames of hell and lay still. Stop, cried his mother. You're killing him. The doctors and advisors said, we do not understand. He was a normal child. His limbs are perfectly formed, and his skull has a monarch shape. Now that he is 16, there is one more thing we can try. They dressed him in fine clothes and laid him on a bed. The room was perfumed, hung with flowers, and musk incense lit. Beautiful girls and women were paraded in. They danced and sang, moved and swayed. The prince, afraid that he would respond, stopped breathing. The women, frightened, exclaimed, "He is not human, but a goblin," and ran from the room. The king called in his doctors and wise men. "When my child was born," he said, "you proclaimed the signs all to be excellent and predicted he would rule the world. Explain." The wise men, doctors, and fortune tellers wrung their hands and said to my lord, "In reality, we saw all of this from the start, but we feared to say it, lest the news prove too much for you and the queen. We hoped there might be a way to avert disaster, so we tried, but clearly there is no solution. We did our best." The king hung his head. "What can be done?" They said, "The bad luck of this child might drag down the kingdom. Now you must do what we should have advised from the start. Yoke unlucky horses to an unlucky chariot. Have Temiya driven to the graveyard. Let the charioteer break his skull with an unlucky shovel, then throw the body into an open grave. Once the corpse is covered with dirt, the charioteer must drive away and not look back. This will end the curse. You and the queen have done your best. Now you must protect yourselves and the realm." The king, frightened to think of the dangers he might be drawing upon his people, reluctantly agreed. When the king heard, she ran to the king. "Sire and husband," she exclaimed, "once you agreed to grant a wish that I have not yet claimed. I claim it now." "What is the wish?" said the king. "Give the kingdom to our son and do not take his life." "I cannot," said the king. "I'm responsible for the welfare of all." "Give him the kingdom for 7 years and postpone his death." "I cannot." "For 6 years then?" "No." 5, no. 4, no. 3, no. 2, no. For 1 year, I beg you. "My queen, I cannot." "Then for 7 months?" "It cannot be." Desperate, she wrung her hands, wept, and continued down and down, pleading for their son's life, until when she reached 7 days, the king said, "Your wish is granted." The queen had her son clothed in fine robes, seated on an elephant, and paraded through the city beneath a white parasol. Accompanied by the beating of a drum, it was proclaimed, "Now begins the glorious reign of great Prince Temiya." Each night of her son's brief reign, the queen came to see the Bodhisatta where he lay, silent and still, and with bowed head begged him to show signs of life. Each dawn she slipped away to cry herself into exhausted sleep. The child heard, suffered, but would not move. "If I move, all is lost," he thought. The 7th day dawned. The king summoned his charioteer. "Do the deed," he said. The queen ran to her son and sobbed, "Oh, Temiya, the day has come. I have failed. Today you will die." Prince Temiya was filled with joy. The day has come, he thought. I have been successful. I shall be released from kingship. The prince was driven to the graveyard in an ill-omened chariot. While the charioteer dug the grave, the prince began to move. He rubbed his arms and legs. "For 16 years I lay still. Will I have the strength to stand?" He stood. He watched the charioteer dig. "If he opposes me, will I have the strength to overcome him?" He stepped from the chariot, took hold of it with one hand, and lifted it into the air. "I have the strength," he thought. He called out, "Charioteer!" The charioteer stopped digging. "Who calls?" he answered, bewildered. "I, Temiya." "No," said the charioteer. "Temiya cannot speak. Who is trying to trick me? Look!" The charioteer climbed from the grave, shielding his eyes from the brightness of the figure standing before him. There stood the crippled, mute, witless, and senseless prince, tall and strong, speaking clearly, surrounded by a radiance of vigor and health. The charioteer collapsed in awe. Temiya raised him up and told the whole story. And now, said the Bodhisattva, my time has come. I will go to the forests and dedicate myself to developing virtue and insight through deep meditation. I renounce the kingship. The charioteer said, let me go with you. I would choose that life as well. But the prince said, they will think you have killed me, taken my jewels, and run away. Go back, ease my parents' grief, and then, if you still wish, you may return. But for now, go. My parents suffer. The charioteer drove to the city. The queen, seeing him return with an empty chariot, began to scream. But he immediately got off the chariot, told her and the king everything. Overjoyed, they gathered many nobles and went to see the prince. Shakya, king of the gods, brought him hermit's clothing of bark, a black antelope skin, a spotted leopard skin, and a trident staff. With his hair piled on his head, the ex-prince sat in silence, relief, and joy, a hermit of the woods, all worldly power renounced, free. When his parents and the people arrived, the Bodhisattva was sitting in meditation outside his hut. He rose and greeted his parents, offering them a couch, but seeing him sitting on the ground, they sat down beside him. Their son was not only alive, but a person of strength and real power. For 16 years, he had single-mindedly held to his purpose without giving way to temptation or fear. The king, recognizing this as a sign of great nobility, tried to persuade his son to return and rule the kingdom. The Bodhisattva replied, I am now young, endowed with vigor and will. It will not last. Soon I too will be old. Time waits for no one, not emperors, not kings. I now have the freedom to enter the way. Should I give it up to take on the sorrows of a throne I've sought so long and hard to escape? No, I shall not. Then his father and mother and all that great retinue also felt a yearning for the way and chose to remain to take up a life of practice. The city was abandoned, the treasury thrown open. Chakra, king of the gods, built them a huge hermitage miles long. Hermits' huts dotted the forest. A neighboring king, invading the city, found it deserted, jewels strewn on the ground, some drunken revelers in garments of gold dancing down the streets. Where are the people and the king? He called. Gone into the forest, the revelers replied. The king and his army went and found the Bodhisattva, the king, the queen, and the people living in deep peace. The Bodhisattva, sitting cross-legged, rose into the air and delivered a discourse on the swiftness of time and the joys of practice. The king and his army were moved. They also took vows and remained in the forest. In time, another king, hearing that the throne of Benares had been abandoned, came to claim it. Finding the city empty, the streets strewn with jewels and gold, weeds growing everywhere and creepers entwining the palace, he was struck by impermanence. He went to the forest. Meeting the Bodhisattva, that king and his army took vows and entered the hermitage. In this way, 3 whole kingdoms were emptied. War horses and war elephants freely roamed the forest, their gilded chariots rotting into the earth. Countless people attained the higher life. Even wild animals were reborn into the realm of the gods. In this way, in that past life, the Bodhisattva, as the prince Temiya, with unbroken will, accomplished his deepest aim, doing all he could to aid not only himself, but others. So that's the story. Now let's take a look at it. Now we'll be using Before Buddha Was Buddha with some additions. So let's see. A quote from William James to enter. From William James to begin. There is no repetition, only persistence. The tale is one of the 10 final Jatakas, paintings of which adorn the walls of Buddhist temples in Thailand and elsewhere. These last 10 stories of the Pali Jataka, numbers 538 to 547, all of noble human births, reveal the final tests faced by the Bodhisattva before his birth as Prince Siddhartha Gautama. This Jataka is really a simple story, repeating one test in multiple forms until, ta-da, with a flourish, catastrophe is averted and sorrow turns to joy. The tale's opening is striking. A newborn child recalls past lives and decides not to repeat their errors and sees a goddess. Do babies think about past lives and see goddesses? A Jewish legend says that children in the womb know all wisdom and truth. At birth, an angel touches the newborn's upper lip with a finger, leaving an indentation, and the child forgets. The Bodhisattva in this tale as an infant, as a child, and as an adolescent works incredibly hard to avoid the very things the rest of us work so hard to get: wealth, power, status, and the perks of success. To support him in his effort, all he has is faith in his own insight, the advice of an umbrella goddess, and his resolve. While our determination may not be as solid as his, and while we probably don't hear goddesses speaking to us, our path is, like his, also based on faith. Faith that there is something beyond the intellect, senses, and body, underlying yet not separate from what we see, think, or sense. Faith that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar when he proclaimed wonder of wonders. All beings are Buddhas, endowed with wisdom and virtue. We might say this is the fundamental guiding premise of all myth, that there is something underneath the visible forms that we see, that we can't touch, we can't see, and yet it's there. It is the realization of this realm depends, however, on practice itself. We have to turn to practice to realize this. The Bodhisattva's resolve is deeply rooted when, as ex-prince Siddhartha Gautama, he sits under the Bodhi tree and Mara's army of desires, distractions, and terrors whirls upon him. He will draw on the strength he gained in this tale. He announces, though my blood and flesh dry up and wither away, yet never from this spot will I stir until I have attained full enlightenment. He means it. He's already been tried a number of times along those same lines. He's prepared. To show the development of such determination, the Jataka must present a serious challenge. Without fearful things to face, how can there be courage? For formidable resolve, there must be formidable challenge, being unmoved by fire, rampaging elephants, serpents, and swords, unresponsive to intense heat and startling noise, trials he's put through in this tale, and remaining unmoved by all temptations. Temiya puts the foundations in place for what he will face as Prince Siddhartha under the Bodhi tree. The stage is being set for his great enlightenment lifetimes ahead. Through testing, the Bodhisattva is gaining power for the way. In case 25 of the Blue Cliff record, Hekikanroku or Pian Lu in Chinese, we hear that once the hermit of Lotus Flower Peak held up his staff and addressed his monks. Why didn't the old worthies remain here once they reached it? No one could answer, so he himself said, it has no power for the way. The Jataka show us that to gain power for the way, the Bodhisattva must be out in life's challenges and difficulties. Being tested, he discovers what he's made of. The lotus blooming amid flames is a Buddhist image that points to this. It is said that the lotus only blossoms because of the flames. Enlightenment opens because of passions, temptations, mistakes, difficulties. The difficulties provide motivation. In their midst, the Buddha becomes genuine and a person authentic. Sitting in Zazen and wholehearted living are a pair. The Zendo offers practice opportunities, but as lay people, we must get up and head out into our lives. Life practice is where and how we gain power for the way. The challenges of life can give us the confidence and skill we need for our practice to really come alive. Even monastics today find the world at their doorstep. Political and environmental decisions and their consequences are with us at every breath, every sip of tea. Radiation and pollution drift down from the skies and drop upon us in rain and snow. There's no longer any separate safe place. Alternately, we can't bury ourselves in the world, get lost in distractions, and call this integrated practice. That's like sitting in Zazen, busily thinking and calling it Zen practice. Practice is 1, 2, 3. Just this breath, just this question, just this moment, letting whatever comes go. The middle way is not a compromise, but a challenge to find balance where we are. And yet, while triumphant, this Jataka is hard to take. The prince's parents suffered terribly, and he never gives them a sign. Why didn't he speak, relieve their anguish, and make them promise to let him go when he was old enough? Why the cold-hearted drama? Perhaps the Bodhisattva needed to establish absolute fixity of purpose. So he held firm despite an insensitivity that can make us squirm. It's impressive, but not likable. Maybe he was too young to understand the art of negotiation. Or maybe he understood the risk. As we age, we learn to accept what might have shocked us when young. Maybe the Bodhisattva child was already wise or experienced enough to know this, and so wasn't willing to bank on even his own future decisions. The story presents an insight into karma and character. Karma is not fixed, but can change. As we study the self, which is how Dogen describes the essence of the Buddha way, we find it surprisingly porous. Gradually, we forget the habitual, burdensome, separative self and gain greater freedom to choose new paths. The story also shows that change is not a given, even for a bodhisattva. The issue of sex for a 16-year-old is presented with some realism. The bodhisattva is tempted and stops himself from breathing to keep from responding. Resisting temptation is not easy, even for the Bodhisattva in his 10th to last life. He was human, after all. The story's grasp of the potentially sad consequences of power and wealth are not naive either. In vivid letters, Zen Master Hokuin warned the Japanese nobility that their present life of comfort and ease could easily become one of pain and difficulty if, feeling entitled, they acted callously and mistreated others. Then the good karma that had brought them high would become bad karma, bringing them very low. So I have a note here to myself. This is like the tree bodhisattva who used his position to get leaders to act with greater compassion and care. So we looked at that this weekend. That same issue arises again and again in the human world. We're seeing it now. You'd think at this point we'd have learned, but the history of the world is littered with these same issues again and again. It's a familiar story. Wealth and entitlement overwhelm character. I deserve it. I'm entitled, so gimme, gimme, gimme. Where duty calls and a king, trusting his experts, decides to kill his own son to protect his kingdom. What might the consequences of that have been? The infant was right. Being a king and wielding power can lead to very bad karma. The story also makes it clear that we won't just float onto a spiritual path. We must dig in, go beyond our comfort zone, and do our best. In time, comfort zones become prisons. At each juncture, we must choose to keep going or not. Practice is a minute-by-minute choice, not a habit. It's always fresh and new. This breath, this count, this call-on point. The difficulty of the Bodhisattva's choices sets the events in high contrast. The Buddha who told this tale and who, as Prince Temiya lived it, shows the prince's resolve by pitting everything, including the dashed hopes of loving parents, against a child's firmest decision, a narrative device that makes the integrity and will of this child vividly clear. There is a dark side. Innocence can be naivete, sadly lacking in sympathy. Conversely, the world of experience, while jaded, can manifest skill and compassion when facing complications. Neither innocence nor experience is complete in itself. Compromise and diplomacy are hard-won, mature skills. As the British writer G.K. Chesterton wrote, children are innocent and love justice, while most adults are wicked and prefer mercy. Still, the child Temiya's innocent resolve has resonance for meditators. With each sitting, each breath, we can start anew. Manjushri Bodhisattva, patron of Zendos, shows the way. Swinging the sword of attentive practice, old habits fall away, allowing us to enter fully this moment, seeing the grain in the floor, hearing the song of the robin. Practice is never a habit, but a path of awareness we choose to embody. We can give attention to our wandering minds and their old stories, or we can give attention to the practice, letting each count, each breath, each moment, each koan be fresh and new. As we step out of the realm of habit through daily practice, our lives become fresh and new. It can be challenging. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? Who knows what the next breath, the next ring of the phone, next news report will bring? It remains our choice to keep at it, even though tomorrow may not bring today's expected fulfillment. Yet we know where not practicing will bring us. Like the child in the Jataka will repeat what has come before. One day, Prince Siddhartha opened the door, walked out of his palace, and kept going. Eventually, we leave our old home of preconceptions, ruts, and habits to come home to what's always been, what might yet be. Without the intimacy that practice brings, our lives are easily darkened with belief in what does not exist, burdened with confusion about the nature of our own selves. Even with realization, the work of no longer investing in old habits continues. Yet this act of selling water by the river is a fraud. There is no one not already in possession of enlightened nature. Zen teaching and practice makes a big deal over nothing. Not speaking about realization leaves us stuck. To make a case for enlightenment creates its own problems and anxieties, causing us to ask, am I good enough? Will I ever realize truth? Do I have enough courage, determination, commitment, aspiration, and so on and on? If we keep going, we find our way through, but there is no easy, well-lit road. We each have to do the work. Dig a hole, shovelful by shovelful of dirt. Walk step by step, challenge after challenge, toward what might seem like very distant mountains. We count from 1 to 10 and let everything go, push nothing away. Not clinging to anything, we see what's there, become conscious of it, then release it. We take up a koan, question it, examine it, are examined by it, become it. We face the anxiety of sitting before a teacher, not knowing how to answer, not knowing what he or she may do to move things along or show our own stuckness back to us. We continue through the challenges and issues of our lives. As the old teachers say, to gain power for the way, we don't cling to our practice, but actualize it in life. In the midst of difficulties, acknowledging old patterns and where they lead or have led, we can find nourishment in the Buddha's willingness to share his own past efforts. Despite what karma brings our way, we too can stay steady, come together, and practice. Sangha gives us a safe place to step past old patterns, actualizing what we uncover in Zazen before we're back in our usual life. We don't just repeat our practice, but persist and persevere till something we cannot yet name, that as yet hardly moves or speaks, can stand at last on its own. This Jataka shows that persistence not only changes us, but countless others as well. While this might seem too good to be true, every teacher from Shakyamuni on tells us we can put our faith in it. Our practice whispers it like a goddess in an umbrella. If we doubt, that's good too. Put it to the test. We should have the resolve to find out if what the Buddha says is true or not. We'll take a look at some more aspects of this in our last Jataka we explored this week. It's number 520, the Telepata Jataka. We'll look at more of that later on. So, and if or when we discover for ourselves that it is true, then how deep and how far can we go? Or how far will we go? That's all that matters. Wherever we are now, whatever we may have gained or failed to gain, we can go further. The Bodhisatta, as the child Temiya, worked hard to get what we have now, a life of practice. We don't have to renounce our life. We have books, teachers, and Sangha. We can sit, question, and let go. We can forge our renunciation in the midst of the 10,000 things, passions, temptations, challenges, joys, disappointments, objects and events. It is a noble practice. The path doesn't require us to make the literal renunciation of the Temiya. Our challenge is to get to the heart of it right where we are. Still, the archetype of Prince Temiya's renunciation rings true. We will need resolve and determination. But as the Jatakas show, resolve and determination grow as we continue. Difficulties are how we get stronger, helping us to open fully, like lotuses blooming in fire. Finally, who wants to be king? There's something even better, and that is simply having a life of functioning practice. Temiya had to work so hard to get it. How lucky we are. Mm-hmm. We have it now. So we'll stop here and continue on with